I'm Tom Ray, and welcome to The Gathering Place. So glad that you could come to be a part of something great going on right here on your screen. We encourage you to invite others to be a part of this. Again, this is going to be a sensitive conversation that we're going to have here, so you might want to turn away sensitive ears. However, we invite you to invite others to be a part of this discussion. You'll have an opportunity to chime in and ask questions and things of that nature. But we also invite you to like on this, and then of course again share it with others to let them know about this content that's being brought to you. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you our host today. That is Ben and Talora Bookie and Ken Shelton. And without further ado, here's Ken Shelton.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks to all of you who've joined us tonight and you're watching The Gathering Place. If you're new to The Gathering Place, I want to take just a moment to describe who we are. So, The Gathering Place is an extension of Shelton Covenant Ministries, which is a 501c3. It's a ministry, it's actually a church. And our purpose in The Gathering Place is to offer hope as we discuss spiritual, are you with me? Mental and emotional well being. You know, those three things are very important and very closely related. And so, in offering hope and in talking about those three areas, sometimes we land on sensitive topics, as Tom has mentioned. And tonight is yet another one of those times. We tonight are going to be discussing criminal sexual behavior in its various forms. And here's the reason why we're talking about it. First of all, the world is very confused about all of that. Pastors who might be watching might themselves be uncertain what constitutes various degrees of criminal sexual behavior. A lot of ministry involves touching. The Bible teaches us to lay hands on people. And so we just want to talk about what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate, what can get you in trouble, and also motivations. And hopefully at the end of this, whether it's tonight or next week, if we need to continue this topic, hopefully you will come away with a better understanding of what's going on in the world, of who is there to protect you, and of how you can conduct your own lives in a manner that is pleasing to the Lord. And so, because Ben and Talora are licensed professional counselors and have for years been involved in child protective services and the prison system, as well as their own private practice, I'm going to turn it over to you fine folks to discuss this and to help us. So, Ben and Talora, let's take it away.
So we're just going to briefly talk about the differences in criminal sexual conduct. The laws vary a little bit state to state, but so we're just kind of looking really at Michigan, but they're similar, and so we want to make sure that people are really aware of it. And got to bring my notes back up, but so like in Michigan we have like they'll talk about like first degree CSC or CSC in the second degree. Like you hear all of those things.
And disclosure, CSC means criminal sexual conduct.
So when you look at that and you think about that, but first degree is the most serious, and that usually involves a child under 13 or a child between 13 and 16 if the accused is in a position of authority over them. So that could be a teacher, it could be a pastor. It doesn't just have to be like a parent. Like that's usually what we think, but and that usually has like the harshest prison sentence anywhere from usually 25 years to life, right? So That's like the worst of the worst when we think about those things. So, and then it kind of goes down from there. There's like CSC, second degree, so that's um, touching, but there's no penetration, and penetration could be, orally, vaginally, anally, like anything like that. So, making sure we're aware of that. But second degree is usually without, and there's some other serious factors, such as a person under 13, or the other person was injured, they had weapons, or somebody else was helping them in that. And then third degree is um, similar, but there aren't those serious extra factors. There's less factors. And then the fourth degree um, is, again, less, you'd be considered like less serious factors in that, but so but it includes things like the person couldn't consent because of like a physical or mental disability, and this would be like any contact. Like we were talking about bathing suit areas, right? But if you've got unwanted contact with somebody's bathing suit area, that's fourth degree criminal sexual conduct. So so really, like, I mean, there was a time like people are like, oh, you could slap somebody on the behind, right? Just ha ha, how are you? That could be CSC, and if it's something that somebody doesn't want it. So that's just kind of like the real broad. I mean, obviously, there's more nuances to it than that, and again, other states have different qualifications.
And I just wanted to add that first, second, or third degree are typically felonies, and then the fourth degree is a misdemeanor, but it's a high court misdemeanor, meaning that you can go to prison for it for up to 2 years.
Okay,
So,
well, let's take a breath for a second.
okay.
And you all are aware of this and deal with this to a certain extent on a regular basis. I'm aware of it because I was a pastor for 40 years and because I read the news. And unfortunately, with a ministry like ours that was pretty heavily weighted with counseling focus throughout the years, you become aware of certain behaviors. People come in for counseling. Um, you have different kinds of churches. You have Catholicism, you have the Lutheran Church, you have the Orthodox Church, and they have uh, a sacred vow that they take to not violate the confessional. So a person can tell a priest in those religions, specifically Roman Catholicism and uh, Orthodoxy, can tell those priests just about anything, really anything. And they are not allowed to break that and violate it, which I get it, but I don't get it. But nonetheless, that's where that is. As a pastor of a Pentecostal church, that was not the case. And for 90% of church workers and pastors, that's just sort of a loose estimation. But for the lion's share, the large part of pastors and church leaders in Protestant churches, you have to tell. You are, if you're aware. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mandated reporter.
Yeah, if you know that a person is in an unsafe environment where they are physically or sexually at risk, you have a responsibility to tell the police, to report that. And in fact, there are some places that if it's found out that you knew and you didn't report it, you can face criminal charges, as well as is the case, if I'm not mistaken, in Australia with the pastor of Hillsong Church, the founder, Brian Houston, who knew that his father had criminal sexual behavior with minors, and he was defrocked from his position, but the son knew about it. When he took over the ministry, he didn't tell. And then that news came out 30 years later when Hillsong is running high and strong, and it just about ruined his ministry, and he's facing criminal charges. I don't know where that stands right now, so if forgive me if I'm off on that, because that's pretty critical. Recently, we've heard of Robert Morris, pastor of Gateway Church. And let's talk about that for a second. Initially, when we were aware of that, I was not comfortable with discussing it, because I think that it's such a delicate issue, and people can get inflamed with certain feelings about that, maybe triggered, or also feel like the pastor should be protected. I just didn't want to get into it. But I changed my mind on my part. Tom and Ben and Talora, you guys were ready to go, and I was holding up, stop, yield. I didn't want to. But and now I feel like it's a good thing to discuss. But that had some peculiarities with it, because it happened in one state, and then his ministry is in many different or various states. And so you have statutes of limitations in, say, Arkansas or Oklahoma, and then different ones in Texas. And then you have, it wasn't considered rape, but it was considered criminal sexual conduct with penetration. I forget the terminology. You might remember the terminology. It was not sexual penetration, like, he didn't rape her, but with instrumentation, it's called. That's what it is. I'm reaching for it. So now, again, taking a deep breath, because we're talking about a really sensitive subject here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm aware that our viewers may be watching this. We may have law enforcement watching this. We don't know. We may have, anytime you're talking about these things, there's the possibility that law enforcement, the FBI, you have that are aware that these discussions are ongoing. And I think that's really good and really important.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also aware on the other side, you have predators, and quite honestly, churches are a magnet for predators. And and you have people who've been triggered and will be triggered by this conversation. So I want to say, if this is really sensitive for you, and if you're finding it hard to listen, we just encourage you. You don't have to listen to this, and you can just shut us off, and we still love you, and we respect you, and you could communicate with us, and if you want, we will pray with you and for you. So don't feel like, if you're a faithful viewer of the Gathering Place, don't feel like you're going to hurt us if you decide not to watch. And of course, it's completely anonymous, so we would know anyway. All right, so that was a sufficient breath, right? Ben and Laura, Tom, pick it back up, if you will. So we had first, second, third, and fourth with their variations. You might want to touch on them one more time, because it's a lot of information.
Yeah.
First degree is the worst, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it definitely, like, if you're not in Michigan, and even if you are in Michigan, look it up. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
every state, every country that you're in, like, you can usually see the laws around everything and the legal definitions of all these things. So be aware of what that is.
And you can also use, it's called PSOR, Public Sex Offender Registry. And you can use that to see, like, if there are any offenders in your area. It also gives the degrees, what they have been convicted of, and what tier they are, which is another thing we were going to talk about. There's 3 tiers when you register. The first tier, and all 3 of these are in person. The first tier, they usually will give with a misdemeanor. And it's in person, one time per year for 15 years, they have to register. The second tier, which is the less serious felony, it's in person, two times per year for 25 years. And when I say that they have to go in person, they, like in our area, it's to the sheriff's department. They get a new picture, they verify their address, different things like that. And then the tier three is four times per year for life, and it is a serious felony or sex crime.
Yep. I think it's important to know every state has a sex offender registry, but they all look different. And again, how long people have to be on them, how often they have to report is state specific. So make sure you're aware of what your state has, and because there's that whole piece where like somebody may not be on there because they may have come off of it. But sometimes we want to be aware of those. If it's been the most serious sexual crimes, sexual conduct, they should be on for life. But again, all right, that could vary in your state. So,
and you can always Google people's names. I've done that before. Just put their name in Google if they have like some type of court case. Sometimes that'll show up their name. So, just if you're concerned about those things,
Sure. I think it's a good practice if you're moving into a new neighborhood.
Yep.
Or if you have high turnover of people moving in and out of neighborhoods or in your town. That's really important. So most of the time, if a sexual crime has been committed on another person, say a minor, or a person who is unable to consent, as you said, Ben, either mentally, emotionally, because of age. The age in Michigan is the age of consent is what?
16.
See, a lot of people think it's 18.
Yeah. Well, probably should be, but 16.
Absolutely right. I'm a father of 3 daughters, and I have a baseball bat and a 12-gauge shotgun. No, I'm teasing. I don't use those.
Yeah.
But anyway, so a perpetrator is most of the time somebody who is known to the family, known to the person, right? An uncle, a cousin, a sibling, a pastor, a teacher. You read about these things all the time. So I want to bring one thing up, okay? It's really important. Let's say there's a rumor in a family that Uncle so-and-so is a little too touchy-feely. And somebody had something to say about that, but nobody believed him, right? That is a very common thing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
About that.
And not only often people don't believe it, or they might believe it and just not want to deal with it. Right? We don't tell family secrets. We don't tell church secrets.
Yeah.
But statistically, anywhere from 60 to 75% of sexual assaults go unreported, and only about 12% of child sexual assaults are reported. And so, which makes sense because kids often don't have the language to even say anything that we might understand, right?
Right.
And so it's really important as adults that we look for those warning signs, which is a whole other topic. But it's a problem that that things don't get reported, and there's reasons people don't want to report because nobody's going to believe me. They didn't believe me back then.
Yeah.
So if Uncle so-and-so was handsy and then somebody tells another member of the family, oh, don't worry about it, he doesn't do that anymore. That's not likely. We call that recidivism when a person has a tendency to return to a particular behavior. And sexual deviances is how we refer to it, really, whether they're crimes or even uh, fetishes or various things. Such a high rate of recidivism. It's really probably near the top. It is because it's so intrinsic to human nature to have certain ways to look at self, certain ways to look at others, certain ways to deal with sexual issues. And so, because it's so intrinsic or so much a part of our humanity, it will sprout wings all over again. And, so could you guys talk about that for a little bit? Have you run into that?
Yeah, we do, it's interesting. I did juvenile justice for several years, like basically juvenile probation officer. Um, and if we can like catch those behaviors when they're younger, when their brain is still developing, and because after 0 to 3, adolescence, puberty is when your brain changes the most. If we can catch it during that time, they're much less likely to recidivate. And so it's kind of a crucial time. And so when we're talking about like not reporting things and trying to keep things secret, like, well, I don't want to get my child in trouble, get them the help. And
because then it becomes a lifelong problem versus you being able to be part of their healing or their therapy.
So what are those ages again, Ben?
So just look, I mean, really, it's just anything really 21 and under. I mean, like when we look at when our brain is really developing the most. So, if we can catch that, there's treatment.
Right. And so very often, adolescent boys, I'll say that is probably the most significant place. Adolescent boys are more exposed. The age of exposure has dropped dramatically with the onset of internet porn. In fact, there aren't many middle schoolers who haven't been exposed to online porn. And the way parents handle that is very important. That's another subject entirely. But if an adolescent young man or girl are behaving in a way sexually, it's probably because they've been somehow violated or introduced to porn, or they themselves have been inappropriately touched. I'm reading now from the Child Sexual Abuse Statistics, the National Center of Victims of Crime. 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys is a victim of sexual abuse. And those are self-reported. So think of 5 girls that you know. Okay, so one of them, I mean, I know that's crazy, right? That's 20%. So, I mean, I know so many young people through the years that have acknowledged that a teacher, a leader, and then they feign innocence, oh, I didn't know that, was a problem. I'm talking about the perpetrator. How I mentioned earlier that churches are a ripe setting for predators and perpetrators. Let's talk about why that's the case. And I don't want to get everybody's antenna up so that everybody is like, oh, I don't know, that guy looked weird. We all look weird Sunday morning with our hair sticking up sideways. So let's talk about why the church is. And if I'm moving in and out of your picture, it's because the mechanism that holds my seat still isn't working. So I have to fall right back. So, if I disappear,
do it. No.
So let's talk about that. Why is the church such a playground for all this?
We have what's the church about? Redemption, right? Grace, redemption. And it should be. But I think that also pulls in abusers too. Because, first of all, you're redeemed, you have grace. All of a sudden, you're working with children because he's been saved. He's been saved for 10 years, or for that matter, she's been saved. I mean, there are women who abuse as well. And I think that it's so hard because I do believe in redemption. I do believe in grace, but I also believe that we need to have our guard up when it comes to someone who has abused others.
Right.
Bible tells us, guard your heart, for that's the very wellspring of life. Well, as church leaders, as adults in the church, we have other people to look out for too.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
brothers and sisters.
That's
We're
so
family.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, we're
People are
family.
counting on you.
Yeah, yeah. And we need to, also, I think you were kind of talking about this earlier about like victims tend to be, they tend to be like discouraged from talking. Victims tend to be, well, we don't tell those stories. When I was sharing my story at a church, I had a person tell me in the bathroom basically to discourage me from telling my story because we don't talk about those things, and then that makes you just want to be quiet. What about the people who need it? Like the Second Corinthians chapter 1, 3 through 7. We give peace. We share those things that God has done for us, that peace He has given in our life, so that when you're suffering, that we can say, "Hey, God's got you. He's got peace. He can help you. He can walk you through healing." So,
These are delicate issues, and generationally, you'll find different responses.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm 71. My father died 5 years ago, uh, 2 weeks shy of his 95th birthday. In my father's generation and my mother's generation, you just don't talk about it.
Hmm.
I was sexually abused as a young boy by an older cousin. I was 5, he was 18. But I didn't have any idea what was happening. I didn't have the language for it. I didn't, and he was my favorite cousin. He was funny. He was outgoing, always laughing, always telling jokes. And he made me promise not to say anything. And I just was told, I was a good little church kid, 5 years old. People don't understand how confusing that is for a child. And it happens much more often than we let on. I have been told, I wrote a book called Covenant Talk, Words That Set Us Free, in which I referred to what happened in my life. It's not graphic. I don't go into graphic details. I just talk really more about healing and restoration and all that. But I had one really wonderful lady who was a retired teacher say, "Why in the world would you have ever told your parents? Why in the world wouldn't you have told your parents?"
yeah.
I had a church official who is no longer with us. He was up in heaven shouting on the streets of glory, probably. He was a friend of mine, wonderful man, well known in our denomination. He said, "Well, Brother Ken, here's what you do." He told me this as an ordained bishop in the Church of God. He was and I was, he said, and he was a psychologist. And he said, "Well, here's what you do with that. Okay, you've told it, right? Now forget it. Forget it. People don't want to hear it. Just forget it. And let's move on. Because we want you to move ahead in positions in the church, and we don't want to talk about that." And I said, well, it's too late. So then there's a misunderstanding that does need to be clarified. This idea that people who've been abused become abusers.
Thank you. Yeah.
That is just not true.
Yeah.
The overwhelming majority of people who've been abused would, that's the last thing they would ever want to do to another human being. But when that does happen, in those cases where that does happen, that sexual abuse tends to have been repeated over and over. Now, I'm just speaking generally. I know there are exceptions. Correct me if you think I'm wrong, because I want to speak truth. Okay, so some people are abused on a fairly regular basis for years, and so sometimes, not always, those people, uh, for whatever reason, the bend that happens in their development causes them to revisit that place and then to perpetrate it on somebody else. But that is more rare than we like to think.
Uh,
Um,
but something you were saying earlier is that, um, there's a handful of people that will abuse, and we don't know why. We don't know what is different about this handful of people who were victims that become abusers.
right.
And I think that's the biggest unknown, which is why it makes people say, you know, kind of give that clouded statement. All victims have that capability. I don't know. All my encounters throughout my social work career, I don't know what's the difference, but I do know those who abuse have also been victims. But here's the other thing. You're making that choice. You're making the choice to abuse. So you know, I know, isn't that horrible? Because I have like that whole, well, we got to give grace. We got to give grace. We do. That's okay. But there's also that understanding that if they've had one victim as an abuser, having the one victim, chances are they probably have had more, and it's just not reported.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes many more. Um, it is a shame that anybody has ever been abused by a predator or perpetrator, but it's happened since humans have been on the earth.
Yep.
And, sexuality is such a potent force. Young boys from, say, the age of 10 to 18 uh, are really driven by testosterone. I mean, as a very significant factor. And so they'll always be interested in sex, even though they may not tell their parents. There'll be an interest in telling jokes or certain kinds of behaviors. And parents need to know how to engage their kids in discussions without shutting them down or without inappropriately encouraging certain behaviors. That again is a whole nother month's discussions, right? We got to get into. Uh, so our goal tonight was just to talk about there are very deliberate categories,
Hmm.
and Ben has very adequately described those. Let's talk about pastors. Um, I was pastor. Tom's pastor. Ben and Tulor are ordained ministers as well as counselors. Um, we lay hands on people in Pentecostal churches. What does that mean? That's a misunderstood concept. Generally, we follow the teachings of James, who,
Hmm.
in the fifth chapter of his book, the brother of Jesus, said, is anybody happy? Let them sing songs. Is anybody sad? Let them pray. Is anybody sick? Call for the elders of the church and let them anoint them with oil and pray the prayer of faith over them. and they'll be healed, and the Lord will forgive them of their sins. And so we do that. We follow that. We take a vial of usually scented olive oil, or if nothing else works, last night in a restaurant, a woman was introduced to me who was diagnosed with breast cancer, and the restaurant didn't have any olive oil, so they gave me vegetable oil. And then I had the women gather around, and I said, ladies, put your hands on. I didn't know this woman. I said, would you please just, lay hands on the sick? And then I just touched her forehead lightly. Because I don't know her.
Mm-hmm.
But there are times when pastors can get in trouble. Tom, I'm going to throw the football over to you. So when we know a pastor that was falsely and wrongly accused and was actually charged with 4 counts of criminal sexual conduct and a 4th degree stuck. Correct me if I'm wrong. He just basically patted a woman's arm as he was praying for her. Is that not correct?
I believe so.
And because she didn't tell him to do that, he was convicted of 4th degree criminals. He had no idea that was going to happen.
Mm-mm.
I went to court and observed it and watched it happen. Here's the other thing. Then she wrote a letter and said she made the whole thing up. Cost him $300,000 in legal fees.
Yeah, there's a lot
There
behind that in regards to, a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon, hopefully to cash in. And so a lot of folks made up some false testimonies, which came out many years later. And just to see the grace in the pastor to forgive these people.
It's unbelievable.
Running his name through the mud. And I was on staff. I saw, the news media showing up and, all the pain that was involved in that. And then to see grace and restoration. I mean, that was powerful. But, but all this supposedly happened in a room of like 120 people, as I recall. And so it's, ridiculous to even think that something like that could happen in a room where there's so many witnesses. But on the other side of the coin, we were taught, in ministry on how to pray for people, as you were mentioning, Ken, and how to, apply our hands and where to put our hands and things of that nature. Sometimes if we're praying for a woman, for instance, and it's their stomach or some area such as that, that's not an area that we want a man to touch. So typically a woman will place her hand there and then the pastor will touch that woman's hand. Was one process. And then even on how to, and as you mentioned, Ken, in the Pentecostal church, there's an experience of people, falling out in the spirit. And so there was a method by how that was done so that people or men specifically wouldn't catch a woman inappropriately. And so there's methods on how to do that's being taught. But a lot of churches don't do that, don't have those conversations, and things like that just happen. And, and hopefully everything runs smoothly and everyone understands this is not, to, cop a feel or something like that. But it was,
Which is actually a criminal thing,
Yeah. So there's obviously that going on. And so there's a lot of churches that don't, practice the right methods on how to do these things. And, they just pray. They lay their hands on the woman, on their chest or on their stomach, not to be sexual, but they do that and it's inappropriate, or can be thought as inappropriate anyway. And so there always needs the Bible tells us to not be ignorant of the enemy's devices. And then something to your note earlier, to Laura, the Bible tells us that we are to know those that labor among us. And so we have a duty to do that, to follow or find out what's going on with those that we minister with and minister under, so that we're doing everything above board and with the right character and integrity. And so there's a process in all of that. But again, I think that scripture, not being ignorant of the enemy's devices, I think a lot of us are sometimes. And, going back to what we talked about earlier, I know of people growing up in the church, that didn't talk about those things that were inappropriate. And, we just don't talk about those things. But I've been seeing I saw this saying, and it's based on a scripture as well, but tell the truth and shame the devil, right? Tell the truth and shame the devil. I actually saw a hat on that this morning. But that's what it is tell the truth and shame the devil. And a lot of us think that we're the ones that's going to be shamed. And so it keeps us from telling the truth. And Ken, even for you to share, what happened to you as a young man, a young boy rather, I think it exposes the lies of the enemy, and helps other people who may have been in the same situation and know that there's help, hope, and healing for people in those conditions.
Well, that's really good, Tom. All of us, I believe, can say uh, without without anybody disagreeing, both the offender and the person who's been offended, there's mercy for you, there's grace for you, there's help for you, and but it looks different for each one. And I want to say, for people who have a lot of criticisms of the church, church attendance is one of the factors that always is involved in the success of a young person. Being involved in a healthy church, of course, we know there are unhealthy churches. We know there are toxic churches because there are toxic people. But if you do your homework, due diligence, and you know the church, and you go, and if it, you don't check your brain at the door, if it makes sense to you, and if it feels right to you, and you know people, the vast majority of churches are safe places to be. But we can't screen everybody that comes in the door. And not only that, it's a very unhealthy way to live to suspect everybody that walks in the door. You just can't do that. I mean, there's some therapy that's needed there too, right? I mean, you can't go around looking at people and say, well, I read about guys like him or whatever. Well, that's just a very sad and anxious way to live. And a lot of people can be hurt by false accusations, right?
And I wanted to say something else too about something you were talking about the leader that told you that you, what was it? How did you say that? That you just
okay, you told it, now forget about it. And let's move on.
Yep. Because the thing is that we try to pluck the trauma out, right? Victims try to. A lot of them will say, I just want it gone. I just don't want to think about it anymore. You can't. The trauma is a part of you. Just as being at grandma's house, smelling fresh apple pie is an experience. The trauma is an experience that you can't undo. It can't be
Well,
undone.
It's a grief. You suffered a loss.
Yeah.
For children, they suffer a loss of innocence. And so there's a grieving process that occurs. And, if someone had lost a relative, we wouldn't tell them, oh, stop that now. Don't cry anymore. That's wrong. Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? I want to say one more thing, and I know we're getting into a lot of subjects, but for women,
Gallagher says hi.
by the way, this is a member of our team known as Gallagher. And
He's
Gallagher
very
is
compliant.
exactly as big as he looks. And so there you go.
Sit. Sit. Sit.
Yeah, it's not a dog. He's actually a moose.
I know. Come here, Bob. Here, sit down. Sit
All
down.
right. So, to the precious women that are sincere and love the Lord and have been the volunteers in church and have given of themselves and their time and their goodwill, and in the instances where you've become aware that perhaps the man that you're married to is deviant in some way, or you believe that he is, but you don't want to face the truth because your entire security depends on him bringing a paycheck home. Now, I know there are a lot of places where that doesn't happen, but share an experience. I'm not sure I handled it the right way, but I handled it as much. I was just in my late 20s, just started a church. His family started coming. They invited us over for dinner. First of all, when we got to the house, I felt like it was the Adams family. I mean, the house was freaky. It was just an unpainted old farmhouse. It was in rough shape, but I went in, mom, dad, uh, early 20s kids. I think there were four of them, early 20s, teens, all the way down to a little boy who's like 9 or 10. And we ate. That was a delicious meal. And this is a long time ago. This would have been in the 80s. And we got in a car to go. And I looked at my wife. I was just, I might have been 30. Anyway, I looked at her and I said, that man is abusing his family. And she said, what? Why would you say that? And I said, I don't know. I feel creepy saying it, but he's abusing his children. He is. I can guarantee it. I know that he is. I don't know how I knew that, except the Lord just let me know that. And so it was only a few weeks later that I was called in the middle of the night and he was holding his family hostage with a shotgun because the oldest boy saw the dad making overtures to the youngest boy. And all of the boys, there was one girl and three boys, and all of them had been forced by their dad since they were little, about that age. And so when the oldest told the mom and she confronted the dad, of course, she probably knew about it anyway, but didn't want to face it. He just locked the doors and held them all at gunpoint. And, you go back and you say, what could I have done? Nothing, because he would have probably shot me. You can't, my point is, you can't throw accusations around. And we're talking about a living subject here. It's almost like what we're talking about tonight is dynamite, and we're passing it back and forth. And while we may be somewhat accustomed to it, if one of us drops it, it's going to go off. And we just want to make sure that what we're saying to you is, as much as we've talked about it tonight, don't go to bed preoccupied with it. The Lord has helped me through the years and through some extremely fine therapy and love and appreciation and the best wife the world has to offer, and the good grace of God. It's okay. It's all right. The Lord saw me through it. And let's talk about, just for a second, what about the person that has a spouse that was abused as a child and how that interferes? How can that interfere with a marriage?
Well, I mean, you name it, an area of a relationship, it could interfere, right? I mean, trust, I mean, intimacy, um, you know, and just even being able to communicate. Um, I mean, we actually, I mean, we see this quite often, and people come in and just like it, they're like these things are interfering with the relationship, and it can be on, from either person, right? Um, and even the person who has the spouse, right, may be uncomfortable about having that being a part of like their history and having to deal with that and don't know what to do. So then this becomes a hindrance in different areas, or um, they just feel so uncomfortable and awkward that they shut down. I've worked a lot of times as guys, whose wives have been sexually abused in the past, but um, they struggle with that, and how do I have this compassion and like, but instead they just go the other way, and it seems like they're just cold, and so it definitely like it's a big thing, and it could hit anybody in all kinds of different ways.
And I think speaking from, I know I've shared my story about being abused. Um, and I think even like in our relationship, um, even when we would argue, sometimes I would try to diffuse the situation by laughing, or telling a joke, because I couldn't handle feeling like, am I going to be abandoned? Is he going to hit me? Or even though Ben is nothing like that at all, but you go through those moments, and you begin to question everything. Maybe it is about the unfaithful spouse from your past. Then any little thing could be considered unfaithful. Well, why did you pull out $100 in cash? Or you begin to question everything. So how do you move through that as a former victim? How do you move in those situations? And therapy is a really good place to start, talking about it, sharing, hey, I've been abused, and, this is what I'm feeling. Writing it down, journaling. I always push journaling on people. Journaling. Journaling's a great tool. Meditation, going to God, finding scripture that makes it, that reflects God's love, and just, I don't know, the journey. So
I will say that we are living in a time uh, when the exposure of really creepy men is a common thing, whether it's movie producers or comedians or whoever it is. And if you've watched the news the last 10 years, we've heard a lot of it, and we've seen a lot of it, and they should have been exposed. And that was the right thing to do. But I think that the scales have gotten a little bit tipped in the whole conversation. Listen, there are just a lot of really good men in the world.
yeah. Yeah.
Good men who want the best
Yeah.
for their partners, who would die
Yes.
for their partner.
You
Yeah,
guys. Yeah.
yeah. Me, I'm talking about me. No, just joking. No,
You're
look,
talking about Tom too.
yeah, I, look, we've all collectively, we've probably got 150 years of ministry here, maybe 200 years of ministry, and I'm the only one with white hair. But um, most of the men are just really good men. Nobody's perfect. So, but there's a feeling like, well, we just, everything is always trashed because of the men, or this toxic manhood, or, and yep, yeah, I got to hand it to some pastors have screwed it up really bad. I know they have. Some of the things that they've said from the pulpit and the way that they've acted. Um, Ben, I'm going to throw this one to you because, first of all, I think you can catch curveballs pretty well. But how do we in culture, men who want to do the best we can, how do we engage that conversation in a healthy way? There's kind of a rebuttal, but it's not, seen as verifying that we really are jerks. You know what I'm saying? How can we say to the public, we're not all bad,
Hmm.
and not
Yeah.
do that in an angry way?
I'm not bad.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's difficult, and I think sometimes we just feel like we can't engage in that conversation because other people have set the rules for it that are, so I'm like, my thing is like, you know what, like I'm not going to play by your rules. I'm going to have an honest conversation about things, but it really needs to start with men communicating with men, and about this topic. We don't, women are great at communicating and getting together, and like they'll all sit and like write millions of books about what it's like to be a man or be a woman. Sorry. They talk about what it's like to be a man too, though. Like you look at a lot of the books are written by women. They're like, what do you know about that, right? But by having some good conversations, and there are good books coming out now that aren't just like, real men go hunting all the time and are tough and rugged, like, really understanding biblical manhood and all of those different aspects of what it is to be a man, to be masculine. It doesn't look just like this one way. I think we've done a real disservice to men in general in the church, and just like, this is what a man's like. And so, well, if I can't reach that, right, like whatever that is, like, well, I'm not, I guess I'm not a man, right? And I, like it's kind of been a big topic for me, even just like, I don't want to go to a wild game dinner. Don't invite me. I have no interest in that. Lots of
Yeah,
guys
all
love it,
guys have to do that. I don't, first of all,
right?
I don't know how long you left that rabbit out. So
I don't, I don't want to eat
Was
your
it
possum.
was it roadside?
So, but it is like, we need to take back the conversation, but the church needs to take it back. Men in the church need to take it back. Guys are notorious for not getting involved in things at church, like, like men's ministries. Get involved, and even if you think it's uncomfortable or weird or awkward, get involved. And and if guy, like, I don't know how many guys come into therapy and they've never been there, and they're usually like at the end of it, they're like, well, this wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And I'm like, it usually isn't. It's fine if you're nervous or anxious about going to therapy. Get in there. I've had these conversations with guys in therapy, and because it's such a significant issue.
yeah,
I think that a lot of times, when someone is offended by someone of a particular category, then everyone in that category is bad. For instance, if you had a bad experience with a police officer, then all police are bad. I was jumped by 5 black dudes, and for a season, all black people were bad, right? Until God healed me of that. But there's this thought, and when I've been abused by a person of a particular gender or whatever the case may be, then all people, when or all people in that category are pigs, right? Or a woman who's had a bad relationship with a man, and all men are bad, and until it's been proven otherwise, that's the thought or that's the lie that gets placed into their head, unfortunately. And so we do have a job to do as men to continue to be people of character and integrity to the best of our ability. As Ken said, we're not perfect. We make mistakes. We blow it from time to time. But the heart of that, in being a person of integrity and character, is admitting, look, I made a mistake, and I'm working towards being more like Christ every single day. I on something you said, Ben, in regards to getting men together, I had a great thing happen where a guy in our real estate office, a mortgage guy, he saw something in me that he really liked in regards to just being who I am. I'm a pastor, I'm a Christian man, and that comes out in everything that I do. And so he saw that. He's like, man, I've often seen separation between business and Christian stuff. If you be a Christian at church, but in business, you just be a business person. But I think it's a part of it's touching every part of who you are and what you do. And so what happened is he thought about us having a Bible study. And so we're meeting at the real estate office, and we've got realtors and mortgage people and others from different industries all meeting in the business of the real estate office and having fellowship with one another and learning about faith principles in business and how to apply that and how to be that same person wherever you are with whomever you're with. And it's just been exciting to see that grow and to see the impact it's had on these men that have not been a part of something such as that in at all or in many years. And so that's very exciting. But I think in those conversations, we have some tough conversations about, things from how you treat your wife, how you treat a woman, to being a man of integrity and character and being a good husband and things of that nature. So I think all of that really plays a role. As we've heard in the past, as the family goes, so does the church. And so I think that we really need to do a great job on raising healthy families. And starts at our home, right? And goes from there. But if we can impact any others, there's a movie coming out here pretty soon by the Kendrick brothers, who brought us War Room and Facing the Giants and Courageous. It's called The Forge, and it's about mentorship and discipleship. Something that I think the church has kind of gotten away from, that we need to do more of, and to help in this area to be better men, the best we can be. And I think it's going to be powerful. It's really going to impact our churches at large. So that's my 2 cents. Mic drop.
Well, I'll tell you what, we've covered a lot of territory, and you might have some questions. I mean, we've raised a lot of issues. You might have some big questions. And so we want you to direct all of those to Ben because he's so good at handling them all. No, you can reach out to any of us at any time. Ben, to Laura, tell us how we can get a hold of you.
So easiest way, go to our website. It's quiescounseling.com, QUIES counseling.com. You can email us right through the website. Our number's on there. So you gotta get a hold of us.
Tom, how about you?
Just simply contact me at Pastor Tom Rea, REA, @gmail.com.
And you know how to get a hold of me because you're watching me on either Facebook or YouTube. And we are delighted that you chose to watch. We consider this a real joy and privilege, and we pray for you, and we thank the Lord for you. So hopefully something we said tonight has encouraged you, given you hope, and let you know that you're not alone if you're going through a hard time. And hopefully the barrage of information that we unloaded on you will not discourage you for coming back. So we want you to see us next time too. And we will be here, God willing, next Sunday night at 6 o'clock. We used to have to record this and then upload it, but we have really advanced in the world of technology now, and we're going live stream. Ben, to Laura, anything else you would like to say? Tom? I am just really grateful for my colleagues. Very grateful. Thank the Lord for them every day. And God bless you. Thank the Lord for you too. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time around. I can't find the stop button. This one's different than the other. Yeah, there we go.
Every week.
Yeah, right. Okay. Help, people. This is why we have outtakes. There's no stop button. Help me, help me. Okay. God bless y'all. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Are we still on? Bye.
Bye-bye.